She was the kind of woman people noticed the moment she walked into a room, not because she demanded attention, but because there was something in the way she carried herself that made the noise of the world go just a little bit quiet. Her name was Maya Adeyemi, and by every visible measure, she had arrived. At 31, Maya occupied a corner office on the 27th floor of Meridian and Cross, one of Lagos's most formidable financial consulting firms. Her name was etched on a glass door that caught the morning sun and threw it in gold across the hallway carpet. She drove a pearl-white Audi that she parked with practiced ease in a spot reserved by name. She wore tailored blazers the color of deep plum and caramel, and her natural hair, thick and coiled and magnificent, sat high on her head like a crown she had earned. The world looked at Maya Adeyemi and saw success, and they were not wrong. But what the world could not see, what the glass-walled office and the expensive fragrance and the impressive LinkedIn profile could not reveal, was the woman Maya was long before any of this. They could not see the 12-year-old girl who had knelt beside her mother's hospital bed in a government ward that smelled of antiseptic and grief, pressing her small hands together and whispering to a God she was not entirely sure was listening. They could not see the university student who had worked night shifts at a bakery just to pay her tuition fees, who had typed her dissertation by torchlight during a power outage, who had graduated with first-class honors and wept so hard at the ceremony that her mascara carved dark rivers down her cheeks. They could not see the woman who, every single morning before her phone rang, before the emails began, before the city noise rose to its Lagos fever pitch, rose early, made her tea, opened her worn leather Bible to wherever the ribbon had last rested, and sat with it in the quiet as though meeting a very old, very dear friend. Faith, for Maya, was not decoration. It was not a Sunday performance or a set of rules to be checked off. It was the marrow of her. It was the reason she had climbed without stepping on anyone's shoulders. It was the reason she said please and thank you in a culture that sometimes mistook kindness for weakness. It was the reason, when she looked in the mirror, she saw not just a woman who had made it, but a woman who had been held together by something she could not fully explain and would never be willing to trade. And then came the offer. It arrived on a Thursday, the kind of Thursday that begins exactly like any other, with the sun pressing through the blinds and the city already loud and alive. Maya had just reviewed the final report for the Collide infrastructure deal, months of careful, honest work, when her managing director, Mr. Femi Okafor, called her into his office and closed the door. That soft click of the latch was the first sound of something shifting. Okafor was a polished man with silver at his temples and a smile that never quite made it to his eyes. He leaned back in his chair with the ease of someone very comfortable with power, and he laid it all out for Maya as casually as if he were reading a weather report. There was a new investment vehicle, a partnership between Meridian and Cross and a consortium that called itself Sterling Future. The numbers were extraordinary. The opportunity was, in his words, generational. All Maya had to do was sign off on a valuation report she had not written, based on figures she knew were inflated by nearly 40%. The client companies were mostly shell constructions, hollow as drums, but dressed up so beautifully that retail investors would pour their savings in without a second thought. The commission alone would add 3 zeros to her already comfortable bank balance. There was a promotion attached, senior vice president, a title she had worked toward for years. There was a private equity stake. There was travel, conference invitations, an apartment upgrade. It was packaged so perfectly, so irresistibly, that she could feel the pull of it even as her stomach turned cold. Okafor slid a document across the desk toward her. His pen lay beside it, waiting. Maya looked at the pen. She looked at the numbers. She looked at the names of the investors, ordinary people, some of them retired teachers and market traders and civil servants, names like Maman Ngozi and Alhaji Bello, who would be the ones to lose everything when the shell cracked open. And in the silence of that office, something deep inside her grew very still. She thought of her Bible. She thought of a verse she had read just that morning, the pages still marked with the ribbon that had not moved. She thought of the girl in the government ward, pressing her hands together, trusting that someone was keeping score of all the things the world could not see. She picked up the pen, and then she set it back down. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than she expected, but it did not shake. She said she could not sign it. She said the projections were misleading and the risk to retail investors was unconscionable. She said she respected him, and she was sorry, but she could not put her name on something false. The room went cold. Okafor said nothing for a long moment. Then he smiled, that same smile that never arrived in his eyes. And he picked up the pen himself, and he said she had 24 hours to reconsider. She did not reconsider. Her termination letter arrived by email at 6:47 the following morning, while she was still in her kitchen, still in her robe, still reaching for her Bible. The subject line read, Mutual Separation Agreement. She read it once. She closed her laptop. She sat down in the chair by the window where she always sat to pray, and she put her face in her hands. But she did not pick up the pen. The first week after losing her job, Maya's phone rang constantly. The second week, it rang less. By the third week, it had grown so quiet that she would sometimes pick it up just to check that it was still working. The contacts she had spent years cultivating, the people she had mentored, recommended, championed, turned to smoke. Colleagues who had attended her birthday dinner in March did not return her calls in April. A woman she had coached through a difficult performance review sent a one-line message. I think it's better we keep our distance right now. An old university friend, now a partner at a rival firm, answered once and said carefully that he had heard things and needed to protect his position. The silence that followed was like a door closing slowly, politely, but without apology. The apartment went next. The lease on her 27th floor flat in Victoria Island had been partially subsidized by the firm. Without the job, she could not afford it alone. She packed her life into 7 boxes and a suitcase. The last thing she took off the wall was a small framed print she had bought for herself years ago, a verse from Isaiah. Do not fear, for I am with you. She wrapped it in a sweater and placed it on top of everything else. She moved into a single room in a modest compound in Sur-Île. The room was smaller than her old office. The ceiling fan wobbled on its mount and made a sound like a tired sigh every few rotations. The communal bathroom smelled of mildew and someone else's soap. At night, she could hear her neighbor's television through the thin wall. She applied for jobs the way a drowning person reaches for anything, carefully at first, then desperately. She was overqualified for some positions and, mysteriously, not shortlisted for others despite her impressive record. In an industry that ran on relationships and reputation, whispers moved faster than resumes. She would later discover that Okafor had made quiet telephone calls. Nothing explicit. He was too careful for that, just careful doubts planted in fertile soil. The word integrity, so beautiful when it belongs to you, can be made to sound like stubbornness, like difficulty, like a flag people avoid. There was a Tuesday in June when Maya sat at the small wooden table in her room with her laptop open and her bank balance on the screen and her pride pressed flat against the floor. She had 3 job applications pending and enough money for 2 more months. She was 31 years old. She had worked since she was 17. She was eating instant noodles for the second time that week. She opened her Bible. The ribbon was in the Psalms. She read, my God, why have you forsaken me? And something in her chest unlocked like a rusted hinge, and she cried. Not silently, not decorously, but with the full, ugly, honest grief of a person who has held on too long. She cried for the apartment and the career and the friends who had vanished. She cried for her mother, long gone now, who had believed in her with such ferocious, uncomplicated certainty. She cried because she was tired. And then, when the crying was done, she wiped her face on the sleeve of her old university sweatshirt, and she prayed, God, I do not understand this. I will not pretend I do. But I chose you over the pen. I chose truth over the title. And if this valley is where that choice leads, then I need you to be in this valley with me. Because I cannot walk it alone. She sat in the quiet after the prayer for a long time. And then she picked up her phone and called a local shelter 2 streets away, the Emmanuel Community Center, which she had walked past a dozen times, but never entered. She asked if they needed volunteers. They needed volunteers. So in the mornings, Maya would sit at her little table and send out job applications that mostly disappeared into silence. And in the afternoons, she would walk the 2 streets to the Emmanuel Community Center and help serve hot meals to people whose circumstances had stripped them of even the things Maya was still holding on to. She ladled soup into bowls for women who had left difficult marriages with nothing but their children. She helped elderly men fill out pension forms. She read to a group of children on Saturdays in a small room decorated with hand-cut paper butterflies that the kids had made themselves. The work did not fill her bank account. It did not return her apartment or her title or her wardrobe. But something about it reached into the hollow places the losses had carved into her and put something warm there. She found that the people she served were not broken. They were battered, yes, but also quietly resilient in ways that made her ashamed of her own doubts. An older woman named Mama Judith, who came every Thursday for the hot meal and always brought a tiny pocket Bible worn soft with years of use, told Maya one afternoon, "My daughter, God does not waste pain. He uses it. All of it." Maya turned those words over in her hands like river stones, smoothed by the current of one difficult season. She prayed every morning. She read her Bible every evening. She served. She waited. She did not pick up the pen. The wilderness is not romantic. Anyone who has lived it will tell you that. It does not look like a desert with dramatic red cliffs and a lone figure standing silhouetted against a blazing sky. It looks like a small room with a wobbling ceiling fan. It looks like a Tuesday afternoon with nothing but silence where your phone used to ring. It looks like the face you wear at the shelter so the people you are serving do not see that you are also, quietly, falling apart. For Maya, the wilderness lasted 8 months. And in those 8 months, she was stripped of almost every external marker by which she had once understood herself. She had understood herself as successful. Now success was something other people had. She had understood herself as connected. Now her network was a quiet graveyard of unanswered messages. She had understood herself as respected. Now, at a small gathering she attended at a former colleague's home in October. A gathering she almost did not go to, but forced herself into for the sake of not disappearing entirely. She overheard 2 people speaking near the kitchen in the careful, lowered voices people use when they want to be heard. Such a shame about Maya Adeyemi. All that talent. Apparently, she couldn't handle the real world. The other voice. Integrity is all very well until you have to pay rent. She had walked out of that house before the main course was served. She had stood on the street in the warm October night and breathed very deliberately, in through her nose and out through her mouth, the way she had learned in her one brief experiment with yoga years ago. She had not cried. She had simply filed it away in the place where all the worst things went, the place she brought to God each morning in prayer, the place she was learning, slowly, and without any particular grace, to leave there. Because this was the real work of the wilderness, she was discovering. Not the logistics of surviving without a salary. Those were hard but navigable. The real work was this. Learning to hold on to who she was when everything that had once confirmed who she was had been taken away. Learning to believe that her integrity was not a failed strategy. Learning that her value was not in her title, and her worth was not on a payslip, and her identity was not in what the industry thought of her. She had a rhythm in those months. She woke before 6. She made her tea. She sat at the small table by the window, a different window now, narrower and looking out at a concrete wall rather than the Lego skyline, but still a window, and she opened her Bible. She had been reading through the Psalms and then through Job, which she had avoided for years because it felt too close, too honest, too willing to name the darkness without rushing to resolve it. She read slowly. She underlined. She prayed. I am still here. I am still yours. I do not know what you are doing, but I trust that you are doing something. Hold the people I serve today in your hands. Hold me. She went to the shelter. She served. She listened. She was changed, daily, by the grace of people who had far less than her and somehow, inexplicably, worried less about it. She began to notice small things she had been too busy to see before. The quality of the light on a Saturday morning. The way laughter sounds when it is genuine and unperformed. The deep satisfaction of a meal made with care and shared without calculation. She noticed that Mama Judith always brought extra chin-chin in a small plastic bag for the children who came after school, and that she distributed it with a quiet expertise that ensured nobody felt like a charity case. Maya began to do the same. First with chin-chin, then with small packets of pencils for the children, then with her time in ways she had never allowed herself to give before. She began to write. Not for any audience, not toward any publication, just in a plain notebook she bought for 200 naira from a street vendor. She wrote what she was learning. She wrote prayers. She wrote letters to her younger self. She wrote questions she was not sure anyone had answers to. She wrote about the pen she had not picked up and what it had cost her and what she believed, in the marrow of her faith, it would one day mean. In January, 7 months after the termination letter, she was called for an interview at a smaller firm called Clarity Capital. Clarity Capital was not Meridian and Cross. It had no glass doors with names etched on them and no corner offices with 27th floor views. It occupied 3 floors of a modest building in Acacia, and it did exactly what its name suggested. It offered clear, honest financial guidance to mid-sized businesses and a small, but growing portfolio of impact investors. The CEO, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Amara Nwosu, had done her homework. She had called 3 of Maya's clients from before, the ones whose names Okafor had never known because they were too small for him to bother with, and she had heard something consistent in all 3 accounts. Integrity, clarity, precision, someone who told the truth even when the truth was inconvenient. The interview was different from any Maya had experienced. Dr. Nwosu did not ask about her greatest weakness or where she saw herself in 5 years. She asked what Maya had learned in the past 7 months. She asked what Maya believed finance was for. She asked whether Maya had ever been tempted to compromise her values, and Maya, who had nothing left to lose and everything she was left to protect, told her the full story: the pen, the document, the termination, the room in Suralere, the shelter, Mama Judith, and the chin-chin. Dr. Nwosu listened to all of it without a single note on her legal pad. At the end of the interview, she said, "I am going to need a few days. But I want you to know that I have been looking for someone exactly like you for 3 years." Maya drove home from that interview in her old Kia. The Audi was long sold, and she sat in the parking lot outside her building for a long time. She did not feel the electric rush of ambition she had once confused with joy. She felt something quieter and deeper. The sense that she had walked through a fire and emerged with the things that mattered still in her hands. The Bible, the notebook, the integrity, the pen she had not picked up. Thank you. Even now, even before I know the outcome, thank you for everything the valley taught me. I am not who I was. I think I am more who you made me to be. The collapse of Sterling Future did not happen all at once. Collapses rarely do. They happen the way water erodes stone, slowly and then suddenly. The first crack appeared in February, when a mid-level analyst at a partner firm filed a quiet regulatory complaint about anomalies in the valuation reports. The analyst was not a hero seeking attention. He was simply someone who had run the numbers and found that they did not add up and had more fear of God than of his manager. His complaint landed on the desk of the Securities and Exchange Commission on a Wednesday morning and sat there for 11 days before someone read it properly. By March, 3 other complaints had surfaced from different directions. Investors who had begun to ask questions. A junior accountant with access to the internal ledgers. A journalist who had been tracking inflated infrastructure valuations for 18 months and now had enough pieces to assemble the picture. The story broke on a Thursday, the same day of the week, Maya would note later, as the day she had refused to pick up the pen. It broke in a business daily and then spread the way stories spread now. Fast and everywhere, feeding on its own momentum. Meridian and Cross. Sterling Future. 43% overvaluation. Retail investor exposure. Names named. Among them, prominently, Femi Okafor. Maya read the story on her phone at the shelter between the lunch service and the afternoon session. She read it carefully, completely. She felt something complex, not triumph, not vindication in any cold or vengeful sense. It was more like the feeling of watching a prophecy fulfill itself, quietly, in the language of consequence. She thought of all the Mama Ngozis and Alhaji Bellos whose names she had imagined on those documents, and she was grateful, deeply, wholly grateful, that her name was not on them. Her phone rang that afternoon, then the following morning, then continuously. Former clients who had heard the story, journalists who had tracked down her name as the executive who had left Meridian and Cross shortly before the deal was signed, a producer from a business program on national television, LinkedIn messages and emails from people across the industry whose message, in varying words, came to the same place. "We heard what you did. We heard why you left." Dr. Amar Nwosu called her personally. The offer from Clarity Capital arrived formally in writing the following day. Director of Ethical Investments, a newly created role that was, in its own way, built precisely around the kind of person Maya had proven herself to be. She accepted it on a Sunday morning, sitting at her small table with her Bible open and her tea growing cold beside her, the same way she had sat every morning through all the months when there was nothing to accept and everything to endure. She signed the offer letter, and then she set down the pen, and she sat quietly for a long time, feeling the full weight and the full grace of what had been given back to her. Not the apartment, or the Audi, or the 27th floor office, none of which returned immediately, and some of which would take years, but something else. Something better. She had her name back. She had her story. And her story, she was beginning to understand, was worth more than any commission she had ever turned down. The television interview came first. She sat across from the host and spoke simply, without embellishment, about integrity and patience and faith in a valley. The interview was shared widely online. Comments flooded in from young professionals, analysts and junior executives, and fresh graduates, who wrote that they had been in similar rooms with similar pens and had not known what to do. Who wrote that her story gave them language for something they had felt but could not say. Who wrote, "I needed to see this." The speaking invitations followed. Then a column in a business publication. Then a small community of people, professionals navigating ethical crossroads in various industries, who began gathering monthly, first at the Emmanuel Community Center, then in larger venues, to ask the kinds of questions that quarterly reports cannot answer. What do we owe the people our decisions affect? What does it cost to be honest? What does it mean to build something that lasts? Maya did not suddenly become wealthy again overnight. Financial restoration moved at its own deliberate pace. She still lived simply. She still volunteered at the shelter on Thursdays. She still brought chin-chin for the children, because Mama Judith had taught her that grace is most powerful when it is made practical and small. But she was rebuilding. Not the fragile architecture of status and performance that had defined her before, but something wider and deeper and far less dependent on the opinions of rooms she no longer needed to impress. On a Saturday morning in June, exactly 1 year after the termination letter, she drove past her old building in Victoria Island. She looked up at the 27th floor and she felt, to her own surprise, very little. Not bitterness, not longing. Just the clear, clean understanding that what had seemed like a loss had been, in the full arithmetic of her life, a different kind of gift. She thought of the pen lying on Okafor's desk. She thought of her hands, empty. She thought of everything she had been given, quietly and without announcement, precisely because her hands had been empty enough to receive it. I do not understand all your ways. I do not need to. I only need to know that you are with me. In the office and in the room in Surelier, in the season of applause and in the season of silence. You are the anchor, and the anchor holds. Closing narration. There is a kind of victory that the world does not photograph and headlines do not capture. It does not arrive in a limousine or announce itself with a press release. It arrives in the stillness of an ordinary morning, at a small table by a window, with a cup of tea and a worn leather Bible and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that you did not trade your soul for a signature. Maya Adeyemi's story is not simply a story about career survival or workplace ethics or the collapse of a fraudulent company. It is a story about what it means to hold your integrity as the last, most essential possession, the one thing you carry through every season, the one thing that cannot be repossessed or whispered away or stripped by a termination letter. It is a story about the wilderness as a place of formation, not punishment. About the way God speaks most clearly not in the crowded room with the applause and the pen on the desk, but in the small room with the wobbling fan and the sound of a neighbor's television and the prayer whispered into cupped hands in the dark. It is a story about the anchor that holds, not the anchor of reputation or title or the validation of powerful people, the anchor of faith. That old, quiet, steady certainty that someone who sees everything is also sovereign over everything, and that no season of silence is the final word. Maya's phone is noisy again now. Her calendar is full. The platform she has been given is larger than anything she imagined when she drove home from Clarity Capital in her old Kia and sat in the parking lot feeling something quiet and whole. But the woman who shows up to that platform every day is not the woman who stood in Okafor's office reaching for a pen. She is the woman who walked through a valley and came out the other side carrying only what mattered, and discovered, to her permanent astonishment, that it was enough. More than enough. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Jeremiah 29 verse 11.